All right, so I want to talk about now some micro-budget filmmaking in general. So
Yeah.
I read a quote from you, which I really like. I'll paraphrase. It's something like your collective body of work is more important to your career than any single film. So that's why you're an advocate for micro-budget filmmaking, because you can, produce more films that way. So what are you currently working on? How many films are you currently working on? And how many do you aim to make per year?
Well, that's a good question. So The Disappearing Boy will be the third feature that I've fully completed
Hmm.
and will release. I actually made another feature years and years ago that I never released. It was sort of like my film school. And now I have another feature called Teacher's Pet, which is financed and distributed already. We're going to shoot it in August of this year. So I guess in terms of like how many projects I want to be working on, I think that in an ideal world, this is how I feel right now, that I would have at least 2 to 3 projects at a time in different stages. So I'd love to
Hmm.
have one that's like earlier in development, one that is in, like production or post, and then one that's complete and that we're marketing and promoting.
Hmm.
And the reason I like that is because most films don't happen or don't happen the way that you think they will. So like if you have 3 things on the go, maybe one of those 3 is going to actually fully, complete in the time that you think. Maybe one of the other ones eventually will get done, but it gets put
Hmm.
on the back burner and swapped for something else. And that's just the nature of making films. Is it's this juggling game where you're always
Hmm.
trying to find the right time and the right people and make everything align. And it's more likely that you're going to have that luck when you have multiple irons in the fire. So
Yeah, yeah.
so for me, it's like, yeah, having multiple films is really important just because my goal is to create work. And I feel like this is something I talk about a lot, but I feel like if you're an artist, if you're a filmmaker, like your duty really is to create art. And
Hmm.
however you do that, it could be on your phone, it could be with millions of dollars for an investor. Like that doesn't really matter. It's about how are you going to continue to make art every single day? And if you can figure out how to do that, you can be successful and you can build a body of work that I think will
Hmm.
be, as you referenced before, stronger than any one piece. Because if you think about like, why Hitchcock is great, or like why any of our favorite directors are great, it's not because they made one amazing film. Like
Hmm.
there's a lot of directors that made one film that are amazing, but they didn't make any other movies or they didn't make anything else that connected. And we might
Hmm.
love that film, but for that particular filmmaker, it didn't necessarily bolster them in their career in the way that the body of work can. And I think, I look at like, I've now made all these micro budget films, and none of them have gone to Sundance. None of them
Hmm.
have, had like, Oscar nominations. Like there's been no like kind of traditional Hollywood buzz around anything that I've ever done. However, because I've done it over and over and over again, now I'm starting to get offers from like distributors and financiers, and people are interested in working with me on stuff because I've just put one foot in front of the other, and anybody can do that. Like
Yeah.
anybody could make multiple films on a small scale. And that's what people want to know is like, are you somebody that's done this a few times, knows kind of what it's like, understands the ups and downs, and can navigate a film set. And I think for producers who either want to invest in you or actors that want to work with you, like knowing there's a body of work
Hmm.
is so important. So yeah, I love that you touched on that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good point. A lot of filmmakers think you're only successful if you make one of the major festivals or your film is on Netflix. There's a lot of kind of outdated ideas about filmmaking, from my personal opinion anyway. But like the fact that you're actually a working filmmaker, for me, that's the definition of success. So what would you say to filmmakers, just starting out who want to make a living for it? Is it just, just go out there and make something and just keep making something?
I think so. And I also think like something that I've done is just separate the making of the money from the art, because even if you're working on the highest levels of the industry,
Hmm.
there's no guarantee of financial success. And if anything, I know so many filmmakers that have made movies that have had budgets of 3 million, 5 million, $20 million. And some of them have been successful, but rarely have the filmmakers actually made any substantial money from those personally. And in the cases where they have made money, it's usually not enough to live on for the rest of your life. So it's always about figuring out your own system and your way, whether you're just starting or whether you're working as like a Hollywood director. The best and most successful Hollywood directors are the ones that are also entrepreneurial. It's no coincidence that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas and all of these sort of like top directors also own production companies, also have other business ventures, also have other investments. And this is another topic that came up recently on my blog and newsletter, is that like most filmmakers, like pretty much all filmmakers, have some sort of, if you want to call it, day job. And this especially applies to indie filmmakers who we think are so successful and who we admire and we love their films, but some of them make a movie like every 4, 5, 6 years. Some of those movies don't make any money. So these filmmakers who we love because they create beautiful work and we see their work premiering at Cannes or wherever, they're not necessarily just going home and sitting on a bunch of money and doing whatever they want. Like a lot of them are film professors, or they invest whatever money that they made into real estate, or they open a restaurant, or they have a side business, or consult, or direct commercials. Like that's pretty much 99% of people that I've met in the film industry also do things outside of the film industry or on the periphery of the industry. So I think what happens sometimes is, like, when filmmakers are starting, they have this idea that if I can make money from it, that gives me legitimacy as an artist. But it doesn't really work like that, because even the most legitimate artists that you love don't always make that much money, or not nearly as much as you probably think that they're making. So for me, it's been helpful to kind of like untether those two ideas. And what that's done is it allows me to focus on earning a living as a separate thing that can fuel my movies, as opposed to my movies having to fuel my lifestyle by putting the pressure on them that, like, okay, if this movie doesn't make $1 million, I have to quit filmmaking because then I can't pay for everything. I want it to be the opposite. Like, my business is so strong that every movie I ever make could flop and I can still make movies, because I have a system that exists independently of whatever the market wants to do at that time, or whatever someone thinks my movie is worth or not at any given moment. So it's a very different way of thinking about it, but to me, it's been really helpful. And it's helped just, again, going back to that body of work, like pave a path where I can just keep making film after film, even if they're very low budget. That's sort of, that's kind of where I've been at with it recently.
You touched on interesting there. It sounds like you fund a lot of your own work, and that's often against traditional advice. Never put your own money in your films. Always try to find investors. But it sounds like you do fund most of your own work. Would you advise people to do this?
Yeah, if they can afford to, yes. And if they can't afford to, I would say, instead of like trying to just put it all on a credit card, or mortgage your house to get some money to go make a movie, I would say figure out how to do the movie for as close to $0 as possible. That would be my solution, because you can make an amazing movie for next to nothing. Sometimes you make it better and you're more innovative than having, $100,000 or something. Having $0 might actually create more, interesting kind of ingenuity throughout the process. So, and if you want to work on a bigger canvas eventually, you're going to have to start with a small movie. So it's like, no matter if your goal is just to make small movies forever, or if you want to make big movies or whatever it is, usually the starting point is kind of the same. And then where you take it from there, I guess, is up to you.
What do you say are some of the biggest challenges you face as a micro-budget filmmaker?
I think like one big challenge is just the temptation to not do it this way. And like financing, I can kind of answer that question too, because I skipped over it, ties in with this a little bit. But like, like there's all the advice you hear your whole life. One piece being, don't finance your own movies. And you do second guess yourself sometimes because you're like, okay, I'm doing literally everything that everybody tells you not to do. But to me, it makes sense to do it this way. So like the hardest part sometimes is just believing that you actually are on the right path and committing to it, even when you're in like the harder moments. Like it's easy for me now to say I made this film with no crew. And yes, the shoot days were easy for the most part, but of course, like I had moments, especially at the beginning, where I'm like, hey, we just, shot one day of footage. Like we have another 15 days or whatever to go. Like, is this gonna ever get made? But you have to just believe in yourself. And yeah, I mean, the finance thing, not to jump all around, but I think it might be an important point. But like my goal is to finance movies for the rest of my career. Some movies, if it makes sense, like the movie Teacher's Pet right now that I'm in pre-production for, the distributor is financing that movie. And that's great because that gives me a different experience as well. And I can learn from that. But my goal is that as my businesses continue to grow, my films continue to grow. So every time my business goes up in revenue, that's just more money that I could put into my features. So just like right now, I can finance micro budget features. Hopefully in 10 years, if I want to be financing a bigger budget movie, then I would have that ability and I wouldn't necessarily need to go through a traditional investor. So that's my personal goal. I know that's not for everybody and not everyone's as kind of business centric or, entrepreneurial in that sense. But I do think that we could all open our mind a little bit to that idea of like, if you want, also, even if you don't want to do it forever, like if you want other people to invest in your movie, then how are they going to do it if you're not willing to invest in yourself? And when you're investing in yourself, you see yourself more transparently. Like, it's easy to spend someone else's $100,000 and not care as much. But if it's your money, you're going to be really careful about like how that's being spent
You're
and how
counting every
efficient.
penny.
Exactly. So it's just it makes you work differently, I think. I do think that the advice to like never finance your own movies, I mean, I think it's a bigger risk to just never make a movie as a filmmaker. I'd rather finance a movie and it flop and me realize what I have to do to succeed, or just maybe I don't want to make movies and I don't do it, as opposed to spend 10, 15 years talking about making movies and
I think
wasting
we all
all of
know
that
those
time.
filmmakers. I think we've
Exactly.
all met
Yeah.
those, yeah. Here's an interesting one. It's a debate I've seen online quite a few times now. What do you say to people who consider it unethical to make micro-budget films because you usually can't afford to pay your people, like say your Americans or union rates. So like
Yeah.
filmmaking is a privilege. No one owes you any labor for less than proper rate. So what I've seen this debate quite recently and quite often, like micro budget films are just exploitation. What do you say to people who have that point of view?
I'd say that they probably haven't been on a micro budget set, or at least one that's run well, because I think I've worked on sets from 0-person crew to 200-person crew. And while I won't say there's a direct correlation, I'll say that the worst experiences I've ever had on set and the worst things I've ever witnessed on set were on the bigger productions because they have more leverage to take advantage of people. So I think outsiders who generally don't have experience on film sets on any level, it's logical for them to say like, oh, people don't get paid enough on film sets. So like what's happening on a micro budget set? Like just nobody's getting paid anything and people are getting exploited. Well, it's kind of the opposite. Like I said, on my film, we made the movie for $6,000, but I'm sitting at a beautiful restaurant seaside in Malibu with my cast eating a brunch and, giving them 3 hours of work. And then they're driving down Pacific Coast Highway to go home. And it's like a beautiful, energizing day where none of us felt like we were working. So you can do those things if you choose to on micro budget production. And you can't take advantage of people the way that big productions do when they're like, well, you're lucky to be on this because so-and-so actor is here and this big name producer is here. So like, you better just keep your mouth shut, do what we tell you, work the 14-hour day. Like if I think that people who think that way, if they're not filmmakers, it's just probably an innocent oversight and them not understanding that when you make a micro budget film, it's just a completely different thing than making a big budget film. in the same way that it's like, would it be exploitation for band members to say, hey, let's try to be the next Beatles and let's get together every Friday and have a band practice in our garage for a year and we'll make an album after that year? Is that anybody exploiting anybody? No, that's a bunch of artists getting together to create something of value. And that's what micro budget filmmaking is. So for people that don't get that, I think that's okay. And understandably, some people have been burned really badly on poorly micro budget sets, poorly run sets. And I totally get that. And I feel for those people because there are horrible producers on every level.
Yeah.
But to think that budget has anything to do with how a human being treats another human being, like, I don't care what someone's paying me or what I'm paying them. Like, I'm going to treat everybody the same way. I'm going to treat them respectfully and going to treat them well. And I think that for filmmakers that resist it and who do kind of know better, I think often it's just another reason for them to procrastinate and not make a film. You know, we're always looking for excuses to not create because we're afraid of expressing our creativity. And it's easy to say when like a micro budget film is kind of undeniable in that you can be somebody with no money, no resources. You can borrow your friend's iPhone and you can make a decent movie. If you put in the time, you could find an hour a day, whatever it is, to make that film. Where there's a will, there's a way. And I think if you have that attitude, you realize like the only thing stopping me from making a movie at this point is myself. But people probably don't want to admit that or feel that. So they have to point the finger and say, well, it's not myself. It's that I'm a good person and I don't want to exploit people. So I'm not going to do a micro budget film. But again, time and time again, we see huge budget films exploiting people on a level that is unprecedented and shocking. Like there was a couple of years ago, IATSE Stories was this big Instagram account. They just showed all these union set workers
I
from big
remember that.
shows.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
yeah, like I'm falling
Yeah.
asleep driving on the way home. They kept me up all night. That's never happened. That will never happen on any set that I run.
Yeah.
So that would be kind of my response.
That's a great answer. That's a great attitude. So just switching tack a little, you seem like a very busy man. You're making these films, running a weekly newsletter, doing your color grading, running a filmmaking community. How do you maintain, and your father too, I've learned your father also, how do you
Yeah.
maintain such a busy schedule and not get burnt out?
It's really hard. I mean, I'll be honest, like it is hard, but I love what I do and I try to pick things to work on that I'm passionate about. So like today, you know, we're doing this interview. I literally walked in the door 2 minutes before, put on Zoom, we're doing the interview. And then once we're done, I'll go straight into something else. So for me, in terms of like specific practical things that have helped, I try to just eliminate the downtime because we all have a lot more time than we think in the day. And a lot of that time can just be spent on our phone, scrolling on social media or watching, you know, 4 episodes of Game of Thrones or whatever it is that night. And like I wrote something about this a while ago where I said, like, I have this rule where I never consume more than I create. Like if I tell myself I don't have enough time to write a script, but I somehow manage to get through a full season of whatever, then I'm lying to myself. Like I do have enough time. I'm just not prioritizing my creativity. And you know, at the same time, you know, I really value time away from film and I value time with my family. And that just means I have to be very methodical and specific about how I organize my days and what I'm prioritizing, what I'm focusing on, and how I can leverage one thing to do, you know, have 4 or 5 derivatives. So like yesterday or a few days ago, just as one example, I was working on some new color grading LUTs for Cinecolor for my website where I sell LUTs and post assets and stuff like that. And through creating it, I kind of uncovered this new technique to like emulate the Technicolor film look. But then, okay, that's interesting. So now that'll become something I can share on Instagram. I can share it on Twitter. I can build it into a newsletter, and then I can turn that into a blog. And then if that does well, maybe I'll record something about it in a podcast episode. Or another example would be if I make a feature film, like, yes, I'm making the film, but we're also getting behind the scenes content that can then go on my blog and drive
Hmm.
people to my website. And then I can teach people about the process through a course that will be easy for me to create because I've had the experience. So it's like, yeah, there are a lot of things, but they all are kind of interwoven in a way where, like, for every action that I take, hopefully there's not just one reaction, but 4, 5, 6 different
Hmm.
things that are then spawning off of that. So it's a combination of, yeah, like being methodical, purposeful with my time, really planning out, like, I know what I'm going to do every day of the week. Every week, I know my monthly targets, my quarterly targets. Like, I plan sometimes to a fault, and I'll
Wow.
go off the rails every single day, but I at least kind of have a North Star to where I'm going. And I just love what I do. So I'd rather be making films and making podcasts than sitting here thinking about doing it. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's what it comes down to.
Sounds like you've built a nice system that works for yourself. You've automated a lot of the processes also, where one thing just leads to another. Is your
Yeah.
yeah, is your partner
No,
a
go ahead.
filmmaker also? Is your
She is very supportive of filmmaking, and
Mhm.
I think of her as a partner in film because she works in the health and wellness space, and she's also like an amazing chef, and she does all sorts of things that are like outside of filmmaking. But she's known me since, I was 25, and she's like
Mhm.
grown with me and been on all my sets, and like, so she's definitely very supportive of
Yeah,
what I do, but she's not necessarily a full-time producer or anything like that. And that works for us because honestly, sometimes like I need to get away from work,
yeah,
and it's
yeah,
good that it's not like she doesn't necessarily have to know the nitty-gritty of everything I'm doing, even though I end up telling her anyway.
yeah.
But
Oh, that's great. I
yeah.
think it's so important to have like your a support network when like when you're a filmmaker, it's it can be very stressful. It can be very uncertain at times. So to have someone for you that actually supports you, that understands, I think that's like beautiful.
Yes.
That's great.
That's the most important thing. And like,
Mm-hmm.
there's this thing where like every book I read on like any topic could be on
Mm-hmm.
like personal finance, could be on creativity, it could be on this, like they all have a chapter that's on your partner. It's like the
Yeah.
person that you pick to spend the most amount of time with will have a dramatic effect on your life and your well-being and your
Mm-hmm.
career. And it's so true, even if they're not involved at all. It's just like someone just over time, like especially if you get married and you're with somebody that like year after year is just chipping away at your confidence or making you second guess yourself, or well, don't do this, you have to make more money for our family. And there's so many ways that a spouse or a partner could kind of make you feel like you're not doing enough or you're not succeeding fast enough. And
Mm-hmm.
filmmaking is something that takes a long time, where there's no guarantees. And if you are in any sort of relationship, I feel like it's so important that the person gets what you do, and that they respect that, and that and obviously it goes both ways. You have to understand where they're coming from, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's a huge part of it for sure.
Very true. Very true and very beautiful. I'm going to call my wife after this call. It inspired me. Let's finish on a fun one. So, if you could produce any film and the budget didn't matter, what would you make?
That's a good question. Well, I would probably make a version of I know the film that I would make, actually, because I can't say too much about it because I'm actually developing this movie now. But I'll tell you another film that I want to make, actually. So the one that is not, that's actually even more of like my dream project, because it's more of like a personal film. But it was very much inspired by films like mid 90s that I saw, the Jonah Hill movie that he directed, where it was sort of very loosely based on his life. And this is funny because you say any budget, I still go to like probably like $1 million
Yeah,
budget, like because I'm not
so
interested in like,
conservative.
yeah, like I just
Yeah.
don't. It's also because like I don't, I'll come back to the idea in a second, but like I don't particularly like most blockbuster movies. And
Mm-hmm.
the idea of doing something just because it has a high budget, like that doesn't really excite me. Like the budget excites me because maybe then I can pay some actor that I love who I would never otherwise get to work with.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, do I have any aspirations of like going and shooting on some LED screen and having like fake explosions and things, and then releasing some superhero movie that everybody's going to hate no matter what you do with it? It's like, I have no interest in that. But what I would like to do is have enough money to do an independent film that's, like I said, like mid 90s was such a great film to me, where it was so beautifully done. It was shot on film. It was a period piece. So you know, money obviously had to go into that movie, but it still feels gritty and raw and almost like cinema verite in a sense, and documentary style. And that movie was really inspirational because I have so many memories and like things from growing up as a kid that I want to put into a movie, and I want to almost encapsulate like my childhood in a weird way, because I have all these things and I'm like, oh, those were such interesting memories, and like there's so many lessons in these things, and I went through some pretty crazy stuff, and like I'd love to find a way to fuse that with the music that I love from that age, and then have the money to license the music, to shoot it on film, to get the big actors. So it's not like, to me, the money is not, like I said, about it being on this like higher production value level. It's about having the tools and resources and cast and crew to like really see the vision through exactly the way you want it to do it. Like a movie like that, I just wouldn't do on a micro budget because I couldn't, you know, I can't do a 90 and set something in 1995 without money unless it's in one room, you know? So
Yeah. Oh, I'm the same. I have no interest in blockbusters. We do like relationship dramas, and yeah, if we had unlimited budget, it would just be kind of bigger actors, that we want to
exactly.
work with. So
Yeah. And
so
by the way, like for anyone who does like those movies, that's great. Like I like watching Top Gun. Like that was fun. Like I can enjoy a popcorn movie. I'm not
yeah,
sort of one of these cinephiles that's like anything that comes out of Hollywood is trash. Like I love any movie. Like I watch movies with my 3-year-old, like cartoon movies or whatever, Disney, Pixar, and like I love some of those movies. So like I
yeah,
can enjoy anything, but yeah, that's just sort of how I'm wired, I guess.
cool. Anything you want to plug? Any last words about Disappearing Boy?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say for filmmakers listening, I'll just reiterate something we talked about before, which is like anyone that wants to make films, I think should make films. You already have the resources you need, even if you don't think you do, you do. Like I really believe like most people that think they can't make a film actually can. And it's okay to do it in a way that's not conventional, because sometimes that ends up being better. And sometimes that leads to the more conventional path, you know, later on. So, you know, if you want to make something. Life is short. You don't know how many chances you're going to get. So like, do it now. Don't wait 10 years. In terms of if people want to follow my stuff, my newsletter is kind of the hub. I have a blog, a podcast, a newsletter, and then, you know, I'm on social media here and there. So if people want to go to my website, noamkroll.com, NOAMKROLL.com, and then you could do /newsletter. You could sign up. I send people an email once a week on Sundays, just with advice on filmmaking and anything I think will be helpful. And then, yeah, you guys can get my Noam Kroll on Instagram or Twitter or whatever from there. But I really appreciate you having me on. You asked such good questions, and hopefully we'll do this again one of these days.
And we'll post those links in the description. And yeah, it was a pleasure, there. It was, appreciate that you were here. So like, and like it was very inspiring. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.